Hi, I'm Bruce Fenton. I'm going to talk a little bit about what assault weapons are and give a little bit of background about how firearms work and what the differences are. First of all, the term assault weapon is not a scientific term or a military term, it's a political term. The term assault rifle is a military term and more scientific. It had been used for many, many decades, and it described a rifle which was able to shoot burst fire, or what we would call a machine gun. When you pull the trigger, it shoots multiple rounds at the same time. That's called an assault rifle. In the mid-1980s, the anti-gun movement adopted the term assault weapon, which is a very ingenious marketing trick to sound like assault rifle and kind of imply that these weapons on the streets that citizens had were able to shoot like a machine gun to scare people, and use the term assault, of course, to scare people and help them. It's been very, very effective. And what that has also done, they've changed the definition of that term, since it is an invented political term, not a scientific term. They're able to change the definition again and again as we go. So they'll say more and more weapons are considered assault weapons, and people who are not educated about it say, well, why would anybody be against banning assault weapons? They can't understand. They think it's machine guns or something like that. They can't understand that it's just simply a purely political term, nothing to do with the capabilities of the weapon. So let me give you a couple illustrations. All of these weapons have been checked and double-checked. They are unarmed, unloaded, and we are in a safe location. This is the 1911 .45. This has been used by the U.S. military since 1911, over 100 years. It's very common. You see it in fiction a lot. Magnum PI had one. It's an extremely common weapon. It's something that your grandfather or great-grandfather may have had. Many people use it to this day for personal protection and home protection. It has a .45 caliber round, which is a quite powerful round. This is the weapon that I used when I was in the military. In 1985, I was also trained in this weapon when I was in the military. In 1985, the military switched over to this, partly. They still use both. This is called the Beretta. It sacrifices power. It's a slightly smaller round, but it fits 15 rounds in the chamber and 15 rounds in the magazine, one in the chamber. So you have a total of 16 shots versus 7 shots, and less power. So it has less kick, it's a little bit easier to control, and you have more rounds, but it's a little bit less power. So it's a personal preference. The military goes back and forth on what they prefer for which branch and which type of service and which type of use. This is also something very common that people would use in their home. It has less power than this, which is something that our founding fathers would have had. This is a .45. This would have had the same kind of round as this. But this weapon, which anybody who was in the military since 1985 would have probably been trained on, is considered an assault weapon by the people pushing for assault weapons ban. This, a basic, perfectly reasonable weapon for home protection, personal protection, and something that the military has used quite extensively. This would be considered an assault weapon unless it had magazine, which in, say, New York had less than 7 rounds, or in Massachusetts less than 11 rounds. If you ask people, say, well, what would be a reasonable weapon, they might say something like, well, your .22 rifle would be reasonable. They wouldn't think that that would be considered an assault weapon. Well, guess what? It would be. This is a .22 rifle. This would be considered an assault weapon if it had a handle here, a scope, and a laser sight like this. Then it would be considered an assault weapon. Or if in one of those states like New York or Massachusetts, if it had a magazine that had more than 7 or 10 rounds, this would be considered an assault weapon. In Massachusetts, they grandfather firearms that have magazines from before 1994. So this, the AK-47, is legal even with a 30-round magazine. Now, when people think AK-47, they say, wow, that's a machine gun. Why would anybody possibly need that? Well, it's not a machine gun. As I mentioned, it's very, very difficult for people to have machine guns in the United States for civilian use. This isn't a machine gun, it's a rifle. You pull the trigger once and one bullet comes out, not multiple bullets, not a machine gun. Why would somebody need this? Well, this is designed for multiple attackers. It has happened. It's something that people don't like to, in the gun-grabbing movement, don't like to admit, but sometimes people are faced with overwhelming force. They have 4 or 5 or 6 home invaders, and you can look up these cases, and they don't end well for the civilians. This is the kind of weapon that would be ideal for home protection in a situation like that. This weapon is called the Kriss Vector. This is a more state-of-the-art weapon. It's 45 caliber, same more powerful round as this 45. It has a much longer range. This one has an EOTech sight that you can use. You could put a laser on it. This is not an assault weapon. And if you are in, say, Massachusetts, and you can find a magazine that was made before 1994, you could go all the way up to 30 rounds for this. So it's a far more devastating firearm. It has very little kick. This is ideal, despite its scary look and modern look, is actually ideal for a female because it has very, very little kick. They have a great deal of power, but without the the kickback that it would be harder for a smaller framed person or many females to control. This is not considered an assault weapon. One reason is because it doesn't sell that well. It's fairly expensive, fairly unusual, and the assault weapons bans continually add new weapons to this definition based on whatever sells the best. It's a political term, not a scientific term. It's designed to grab as many guns as they can, make as many illegal, in some cases take them away as they're doing in New York, and certainly make it more difficult for people to buy new ones as they're doing in Massachusetts and many other states. Some people want to make this nationwide. It would be against the wishes of our founding fathers who carried these kind of things, which were also 45 caliber. And it's important to remember it's not a scientific term, it's a political term. You owe it to yourself to educate yourself about how the firearms work and exactly what they're talking about before making a decision.